Art can mean different things to different people. For me, it's all about the joy of creativity. So if you draw, paint, write, dance, sing, craft, play air guitar, or even sculpt using nothing more than mashed potatoes, consider yourself an artist and join our conversation. For the next half hour, meet the artist and learn about their inspiration while we all enjoy the beauty of creativity. Welcome to Season 2 of Art Talk with John Cole Artist. Well, hey, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining myself and Mickey Haddock, who I'll be introducing here in a moment, on Art Talk with John Cole Artist. Today's the 19th of November, and Mickey and I were just talking beforehand. I don't think either one of us really have experienced winter just yet, although my understanding is we have some winter moving in our direction. But if I had it my way, I think it would just be summer all year long. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Mickey, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah,
I'm really happy to be here.
And thank you. Yeah, Mickey is a writer. He works in the insurance industry for IT, correct?
Yes.
And you can talk about that in a second if you like. And I've read a little bit of his work. He's got a website that we'll talk about, towards the end of the program. But I read some of his work, and he's a really good fiction writer. And he had reached out to me, and thank you for reaching out to me, by the way. And this is the first time that we've actually talked. So this is really cool when we get two people that really are strangers to come together to have a conversation and walk away as friends. So Mickey, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm so very happy to be here.
And I was hoping that maybe you could tell the audience tonight a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been on this lifelong journey of trying to figure out how to write fiction and tell stories. In high school, I just really fell in love with reading. And for whatever reason, I don't want to get into the psychology behind it, but I got talked into getting a very technical degree in college. And I've had a career in that. But the whole time, even during college, I was trying to write stories, entering contests. And I really didn't realize how difficult it can be to write a good, entertaining, compelling, and satisfying story. But I finally, after all these years, have started to get the hang of it. And so I'm on this push to get my stories out there, meet some people and talk about it. And also I've been created this blog called Renewable Creativity that I'm sharing all the stuff I've learned over the 40 years of how to tap into your creative self, how to encourage it, nurture it, and then how do you harness it, and how do you channel it to something that you really want to do.
Right. My wife, Christine's on. She says, hello, beautiful soul. So hello back to you, Christine. Yeah, she just made it home, as a matter of fact. So good timing on her part. So
yeah, great timing.
Yeah, I appreciate you watching tonight, Christine. Fiction writing, that was always, and it always has been a dream of mine to write fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and I've told my wife this story a few times, and I'll tell you really quick about the one experience I ever had with fiction is I want to say back in the middle of the 90s, maybe 95, 96, I wrote the chapter of what I thought was going to be this amazing book. And I decided to share it with my mom, wanted that support from my mother. She read that and she got back to me and she said, this is terrible. And I never wrote fiction again. It just was horrible. So, but you're right. It's not easy. Fiction is not necessarily something that comes easy. So, this idea of you wanting to do this, where does it really stem from?
Reading has always struck a chord of joy in me. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to be a part of that. There's also a certain amount of ego that I want to be the guy who writes and who tells a story. I grew up in a family of aunts and uncles who would tell stories a lot. Mm-hmm. And so it's also a familiar feeling of being entertained, and I wanted to be able to entertain as well. Right. So that's part of the motivation.
Yeah. And and I always thought, and again, I've got ideas in my head of stories that I'd love to write. Mm-hmm. And although I really haven't written since that incident with my mom back in the 90s, I do actually have a couple chapters of a book that I was going to write. Mm-hmm. And I paused on that for some other reasons, right? I took a trip this last summer and I was, involved in some other things, so I didn't get back to it. But for me, it's always been, I've not only, like you, an avid reader when I was younger, but movies were a big influence as well for me, right? So, you would read the book, like one of the earliest books I remember reading, two books actually, were Jaws by Peter Benchley and Jay Anson's Amityville Horror.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So one's totally fiction, one is quote unquote based on a true story. And for me, those were highly influential. And then you saw the movies.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, this isn't exactly the same thing, right? So why I bring that up is because for me, when I'm reading a book or I'm seeing a movie and then realizing that I now have the power to create my own story and make something exactly like it should be, it's powerful.
It is. I spent quite a few years trying to write screenplays, and I mean, I've written a lot, but that is next level difficult business to try to express yourself.
Right.
And so part of coming back to stories and novels is that you get to control that entire universe.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're like a singer-songwriter or you're a visual artist of some kind, and if you really like that full control of the presentation, it's novels and short stories can be very satisfying that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I over Halloween, I think it was Hulu, I think, and this was just, I don't want to go off onto the film route necessarily, but
right.
I haven't had the chance to talk about this, and you're the perfect person to talk about this with. Is I finally got a chance to see a movie I've been wanting to see, which was Late Night with the Devil.
Ooh,
okay,
don't know it.
Well,
is it spooky?
Basically the premise of the film is it takes place in the 70s. It's a talk show, because back in the 70s and 80s were really the heyday of the talk show, right? Michael Douglas and Phil Donahue, right, yeah. Merv Griffin. So it's that idea. So everything is filmed, I think, on an older film stock, or at least edited to look like it's 70s, right? And the idea is this person with this child that's possessed comes on this talk show, and then, it gets creepy, right? And I'm like, it's such a great premise. What an interesting idea. And I'm watching the film, and it's like, what the heck? You had this great idea. The writing just went off the rails or something, but it just, I'm sitting back going, something, I could do so much better than this.
That's also part of the motivation, because there is a lot of mediocre stuff that makes it mainstream.
Right.
And a lot of people will be like, geez, I could do that.
Yeah, until you sit down and then you try it, and then you're like, oh, this is harder than I thought.
Which reminds me, your experience with your first feedback, I think it's universal. Like I shared some of my early writing with a professor, literary professor at college, and he was very gentle about it, but his basic message was, this is a hard thing to do, and you've got a long way to go.
Right.
But he did it in a way, and he nudged me in the direction that kept me going.
Well, which is right, because again, I read part of your Hive book, and it's just amazing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one in particular, I started that as just a short story, and it kept growing and growing. And pretty soon I realized, holy crap, I gotta go all in on this, because there's more here than I realized. I was tapping into stuff in my head, and it all started to click. So
how do you, and this is I'll be interested to hear your answer on this too. How do you organize a short story is one thing. All right. From a technical perspective, a short story or a novella or something like that is relatively short. It has a certain scope. But when you're looking at something like a novel, you're with multiple characters, perhaps, or with story arcs that might dovetail into each other. How do you organize that? Do you put that all in your head and it just comes out, or do you physically create something to keep you on track?
So there are a number of elements that really have to be there for a truly satisfying full-length story. And it's a combination of characters, their desires, the conflict and obstacles in their way, but it's also the setting. And then what flows through all that are the themes that are of importance to you as the creator. So, like the book you mentioned, Hive. I've been working in corporations for 40 years now, and I'm very frustrated at times with the way the bureaucracy of corporations work, and I'm also worried about how the big five tech companies they have an outsized influence on our lives and on how the world operates. And so what happens in Hive is it's a dystopian story about when local governments and the national government, they outsource management of society to a corporate entity. And then, the laughs are fast and furious. But I had to come up with a variety of characters to demonstrate the conflicts and the interplay, and had to also come up with that near future setting of how that's going to play out.
Right.
So it's rarely everything comes out at once. It's rarely like you start on one element and you push and you hit a soft spot because you're not sure where to go next. So then you have to look at, I need more characters, or I need a different relationship, or they're in this place and things are going to happen in that place of the setting that will dictate how these characters act. A lot of it is like a clockworks, where there's multiple gears and springs. And if you open up a clock and go, oh my God, I have no idea how anybody figured out how to tell time with this. That's you're building that clockwork into the story. So the best ones, I think, evolve over time as the writer gets elements that they like and realize I need just a little bit more oregano or sugar or whatever, and they keep spicing it up.
Yeah. So on average, not that there would be an average, but I mean, how long in your opinion, just take Hive, how long did it take you from start to finish?
Well, the original story was like 5 months to get a first draft. It can be another 6 months to get to reorganize your thoughts and figure out what I really was trying to talk about. One of the things that's hard to accept is that first draft is always going to be awful, and it's a chance to when you look at it to just say, okay, now I know what I was thinking, but what do I want to say?
Right.
And then you have to reorganize it. I just want to interject. There are some people that will write a novel in 1 month and they crank them out, but they're really focused on a specific genre, usually like very hard crime or space opera, sci-fi. And it's really a pattern that they're repeating. They may change names, but they tend to repeat themselves in the style.
Right.
Typically it can be like 1 year can be a lot, pretty fast for some people to write a book. 2 years is not unexpected.
Right.
If you've heard of The Covenant of Water, it's Abraham Verghese. He's been running away bestseller this past year. He spent 10 years on it. It's a long family saga.
Yeah.
So it's just like massive amounts of family story that he brings into this one book, and it took him a heck of a long time.
Yeah, so I think the key word is patience. That's number one.
Yeah.
I mean, I would
with
think,
yourself.
right? Yeah, patience with
yeah.
yourself, and with the understanding that, and maybe that's part of, because I tend to lean towards the perfectionist side of things. Even in my artwork, right? If something is not that great, I'll walk away from it, as opposed to doing it,
right,
not meeting my expectations, and then I feel bad about it, right? And I think I have that same problem when it comes to writing, is right. I expect to write chapter 1 and it to be perfect. However, I should know better. Every time I look at chapter 1, I immediately want to change it because it's not quite what I was looking for. So,
right.
And I think that's exactly what we're saying here is you have this idea, you go down this path, it starts to turn into something, but it's not going to be the most beautiful baby you're ever going to have right away. It's going to take some time for it to become beautiful and blossom.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Some art, like I follow a lot of writers, and I love to talk process, or I listen for it when they're talking about it.
Right.
And some people are capable of writing tens of thousands of words into a story, realize, oh, it should be this, and they pivot and finish without ever looking back at the first 30,000 words,
Right.
knowing they're going to have to go back and rewrite it. I personally, when I hit that point, I tend to start over. So I might start over a first draft 3 times before I get all the way through to a satisfactory ending.
Okay. So would you suggest, well, how about, okay. So if you're really going down that book writing route, are we looking at, do we want a full draft, or no? We want to go to a certain point until, what question am I trying to ask here? At what point? Because I mean, like, my problem, and maybe there's other writers out there that do the same thing, that want to get started in this path, and I know there are. I know a number of people that have written nonfiction books that have an interest in doing fiction, which, of course, like we're talking about, is different. I mean, at what point should you go back and take a look at that again? I guess is maybe the question.
Well, here, one technique I've heard that is pretty useful is get one piece of paper where you write out what you think of as the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. You write down what you really want to talk about in this story. Like what is the emotional charge that makes you want to write this story, whether it's mental health issues in America, or greedy corporations, or a crime that was committed that you feel there should be justice. Whatever that seed that gets you into a story. And then just some notes about the setting. The tricky part is that beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think of a story being 3 acts, that what started,
right,
the big, messy middle, and then how do you end it? I have found through various studies that it's really a 5-act structure. And it's the first act should be about, like, the inciting incident of, like, telling where we are in this world and what is this thing that happened that is getting the characters motivated.
Right.
The second act is that your main character is struggling with the fact that whether or not they should actually take on this challenge of whatever it is, whether it's fighting big tech, or solving a crime, or shooting a space alien, And then the middle, the middle part is where they have to come to some truthful realization, whether it's a fact about the world they're in. Like if it's a space alien thing, you'll find out, like, there's an even more powerful space alien out there that you have to defeat.
Right.
Or if it's more of an internal thing, it's like, oh, it's because my parents were jerks to me that I feel this way, and I've got to change my attitude towards the world if I'm ever going to solve this problem. And then the fourth and the fifth acts of that story is that character coming to terms with this truth that they've realized at the midpoint, and how are they going to change their life or change the world to solve that problem.
Right.
So those are the most compelling and satisfying stories. And it gets dressed up in many different ways. To get back to your question, one of the techniques is to try to write out those 5 steps. Like, what's the world? What happened?
Right.
Why do they want to do this? Or what's keeping them from doing this? And what's the truth? And then how do they solve it in the rest of the story? So that gives you an idea of where you're going. It's a very sketchy roadmap, right? Not a lot of detail. Some people they'll write like 1 sentence for every chapter, and you can pick like almost an arbitrary number. Like, I like to choose 25. Like, for each of those 5 acts, I have 5 major scenes. So I might have 25 chapters as my goal.
Hmm.
So some people will like write one sentence about each of those chapters and then go back and start filling it out and building up words. I tend to just start writing, and I know where that sketchy map is, but I'm working towards it. If it's a visual art, you've got a big canvas and you're going to have to figure it out. And I think visual artists will, right? They'll make some pencil marks.
Hmm.
They'll have, or they may make a miniature of what they want, and then they've got to figure out how to get it on the big canvas.
Right.
And musicians, they might have a few riffs and some ideas that they like, but if they're going to make a whole album, they've got to build on those riffs and some of those melodies. So it's going to be different for everybody, but that's part of the challenge, is to find what works for you as an artist to get yourself started, and how do you stay with it?
Yes, that's very important, right? And not to get discouraged during that process as well.
Right.
This is close to like a master class in writing. I'll be honest with you, I'm sitting there, I'm listening to you. I'm like, man, I cannot wait when we get off this call. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and start at it again. I mean, seriously, it's exciting. It's a good feeling to have. So I before we went live, we were talking briefly about Hive, and I'm looking forward to reading the whole thing because it really caught my attention. If you go to Amazon, there's the first chapter. They give you the preview, and that's up there. And I read it beforehand, and I was commenting to you about how the dialogue is really, really good. And I know, having done a little bit of fiction writing, even though it's only been on my computer, that writing dialogue isn't necessarily easy. Do you find it to be easy, or do you find it to be challenging?
Well, it came to me quicker than any other element of storytelling. Right. And maybe it's from, I've got a good ear, I was lucky, whatever, but it's been one of my strengths. So, but you can't rely on that one strength. You've got to, right. I've had to flesh out the rest of storytelling, because there's a lot to it to get to make. You can't tell an entire novel just through dialogue. People have tried. They're not a lot of fun to read. But there's ways to, always getting better involves feedback. So,
right.
So you've got to find your trusted set of folks. There's the question coming in.
Yep.
Yeah, if family is good for sharing, but it's not great because sometimes they're going to pull punches.
Yeah.
So, the suggestion was, would you share it with friends and family if you think they know what they're talking about,
mm-hmm.
if they read the sort of stories that you like to write, that's another good sign. And if they're unafraid to tell you what they're like, this didn't do it for me. It's taken years, but I've found a couple of friends that I can rely on to tell me when something is flat, a character's not working, or something about the plot just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So that is a big challenge, though, to get that feedback loop, because without the feedback, you could go off the rails and not really know it.
Right. Yeah, and I think it would be helpful anyway to have the other sets of eyes during the process, because one of the things that I struggle with, just in general, even when I wrote my nonfiction self-help book over the summer, is like any real living person character, and I think the same applies for fiction characters, is you need to kind of put yourself into their mindset as them.
Yes.
As they interface with this other character, which is also you, by the way, yes. Thinking perhaps something completely different, right? Even if you're looking at protagonist and an antagonist, you got two different people with two different motivations coming at things from two different perspectives. You have to kind of be both of them in order for either your dialogue to work or your story to work.
Yes. And the trick is all your characters might end up sounding too alike because it's too much like you.
Well, right. That's so I think having that outside review with that trusted circle would be very beneficial.
Yeah. What I've landed on is I have these two trusted friends that when I've got something I want feedback, I give it to them. But I also go to Fiverr.com and I hire beta readers, and I get 2, possibly 3 more opinions, because you've got to triangulate the feedback. Because if everybody says, if a majority of people say this doesn't work, it probably doesn't work.
Right.
But if everybody thinks differently about that one thing, it might be okay.
Well, right.
You get to cast a deciding vote.
Yeah, I suppose specifically depending on what the plot of the story is. Maybe you want it to be a little weird to where you are, providing that at the end it kind of concludes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you self-publish.
I do.
Okay.
I have tried to find an agent and a publisher, but it's a very difficult task. And I had an agent once for a while. The book didn't sell, and so we both moved on.
Right.
But it's also a fun element, because the craftsmanship required to create a book and figure out the cover, and then all the technical stuff involved of managing. Because of my technical background, I kind of get a kick out of it, so I don't really mind.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, because I think for years anyway, I think self-publishing, vanity press is what they used to call it back in the day, right? I don't know if, and I think it's a little better now, but I think at the time it tended not to be something that people really thought was
didn't get a lot of respect.
Yeah, there you go, respect, right? I think that's changed. I think that's changed big time. It's not only in the fiction genre, but also in things like comic books and all this other stuff, where you have a lot of websites now where you can self-publish. And there's some people with let's put it this way. I think the self-publishing removes the restrictions of creativity that you would run into with a Random House or with a Penguin Books or something like that. And to be honest with you, and we talked about this briefly too, before we got on, even popular contemporary writers can put out crappy books.
Yes.
And Thomas Harris, who wrote Silence of the Lambs, probably one of the best, creepiest films and book, wrote Hannibal, which I couldn't even get through because it just was written so poorly. I could not, for some reason, and I don't know if the book was just pushed through or what the situation was, but I couldn't relate to those characters like I could in Silence of the Lambs. So while it would be nice, I suppose, to have that backing, because maybe you are the next Stephen King or the next, Dan Brown or something like that, you can still be that through self-publishing with people reading the book, which is totally within our control, if you think about it.
Yeah, and once you find an audience that likes your style, likes your material, you can have a great time publishing for them. And if it grows to a big enough audience, you can feel pretty successful at it.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that idea about Fiverr, reading for feedback, I think is great. Now, as far as editing goes, do you have anybody that you work with for editing, or do you do your own editing?
I've had development editors in the past. I've learned a lot. I've been at this so long that I've actually gotten pretty good at it. I do use a tool called Pro Writing Aid to go through the manuscript. The thing is, though, like there's some AI built into it, and it will suggest changes. I just ignore those. When it finds something that's confusing, it's like a fresh set of eyeballs. I just rewrite the whole thing. I don't really look at their suggestions, because the suggestions are kind of weird usually, and it's not. And I try to write with as much humor as I can, and it's not gonna find my humor. So I just start over whatever that section is and rewrite it.
Oh, awesome. Well, it looks like time just flew by, as I kind of expected it would, because I just got all these questions, and I'll tell you, you've been great. It's just like a master class, and at least an intro master class to writing fiction.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to go back and watch this, because you brought up a whole bunch of interesting things there that I think would help me move forward, and I hope that people that watch this either live, and I appreciate if you're watching live, or the replays through YouTube or Facebook, if you do watch this, hopefully this is motivating, because I feel charged to sit down and write something. And we all are inherent storytellers, and I know that we are, because if you have a conversation with somebody, it's not just did you go to the store and what did you buy? You might say, well, how are you feeling? And then you will tell your story about how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Christine asks a really good question here as we close out. I think this is worth answering if you have the time. How much time do you invest every day writing? That's a really good question.
2 hours, which might be actual writing, or it might be some of the administrative work you have to do to get things going.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think it does take an investment of time. And Mickey, thank you so much for being on. I would love to have you on again, because I think
as Kurt Vonnegut once said.
What was that?
I think we're lagging, but I was going to say Kurt Vonnegut once said that no one can be smart for more than 4 hours a day. So that was his limit for writing.
Yeah. Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah. Slaughterhouse-Five. And a lot of those were influential when I was, in my late teens, early adulthood, where I read a whole bunch of his books as well.
Yeah.
So, but thank you very much for being on, Mickey. I would love to have you on again in the future. My schedule is pretty much open. And for those of you that are watching, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to read some of your stuff?
Best place to start is mickeyhaddock.com.
Okay, and I just brought it up on the screen. Yeah, you guys should check it out. He's got a whole bunch of good material there, and I think you're going to be engaged for quite a few hours just reading through what he has up there. But thanks again, Mickey. Next week, folks, I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about. It's one of these weeks that I need to find somebody to either talk to, or I'll pull something out of the air and we'll chat about some kind of weird craft or something like that. But I appreciate all you guys watching. Mickey, if you could hang on for a minute. I'll see y'all guys all next Tuesday for another episode of Art Talk with John Cole, artist. See ya. Thank you so very much for joining me on the Art Talk podcast, where it's my goal to bring artists together to talk about their craft. If you'd like to join me for a conversation, please reach out via email at johncoleartist@gmail.com or by visiting my website at johnrobertcole.com. So until next time, keep crafting, painting, and inspiring others with your creativity. You make more of an impact than you know. See ya.